What is up guys, Taiki here, and in this video I'll be going over DeFi kingdoms on Avalanche subnets, as well as Crabada, an overview of Crabada, another game that's going to be on an Avalanche subnet. So if you like the content, please like and subscribe and leave a comment in the comment section below. None of this is financial advice, and I do own some CRA and of course a Jewel. I own some Jewel. So for you to understand the effect on subnets, let's kind of go over like what are subnets to begin with. So I made a video on this last week and why I'm bullish application specific blockchains, but let's just give a TLDR in case you're low on time or something. So whenever you use DeFi on Avalanche, right, swapping on Trader Joe, borrowing, lending on Aave, you're on the C chain, right? This is a smart contract layer, but subnets are built on top of the P chain, right? So subnets are essentially, just think of them as like side chains or layer 2s on top of Avalanche, and DeFi kingdoms and Crabada are going to have its own blockchain. So you can kind of view it like this. It's not the most aesthetic visual, but this is the Avalanche blockchain, and these subnets are going to be built on top of the P chain, and it can handle the workload separate from the C chain, right? So if a bunch of degens are being liquidated on the C chain, it's not really going to have an effect for gamers that want to play DeFi kingdoms on a subnet. Of course, the most anticipated subnet coming in Q1 is a subnet for DeFi kingdoms. It's been hyped, it's been known, and people are excited for them, right? Of course. And the reason people are excited for subnets, right, is because Harmony RPCs just haven't been able to handle the workload for the amount of users that DeFi Kingdom wants to onboard, right? It's kind of limiting the growth of DeFi Kingdoms just because, the RPCs can't handle, this many players trying to play the game and farm on the gardens or something. So of course, Avalanche saw this as a problem and like, hey, like let me swoop in, take some users, and let's kind of provide a solution. So DeFi Kingdoms, they're gonna have its own subnet. They mentioned Q1, right? Maybe later in Q1, like maybe next week. Who knows? I simply have no idea, but it's coming, right? That's the important part. And on a subnet, you can kind of customize how the blockchain is going to be designed, right? So for example, on a subnet, it's most likely that either Jewel or Crystal, right, is going to be used as gas. So maybe that's going to drive more demand for these tokens, right? And like I mentioned, like whether a bunch of people are like minting NFTs on the C chain, or people are just trying to spam transactions to like avoid getting liquidated, it's not really going to have an effect on the game performance. So the idea is that it doesn't really make sense for everything to be on one chain. Maybe for application specific blockchains will, I guess, increase, or it'll help with the scalability of these blockchains with scalability issues. Okay, because if you think about it, like Eric Ebron, he's a tight end for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like he doesn't really care about DeFi, he's just interested in the game, right? And if Harmony RPCs are down, then like he's gonna leave, right? And that's obviously poses a problem. And Kevin Sikniki, who is the COO of Ava Labs, mentioned that, hey, buckle up for early February, right? Like we all love the bull posting that Ava Labs, that team provides. I'm so hyped, it's coming, right? It's coming. Oh, DeFi Kingdoms, Crystal Veil, it's coming early February, right? So I don't know if the subnets are coming live in early February. I mean, it's like almost mid-February, but maybe an announcement is going to come soon. From what I'm gathering, it seems like subnets are coming in March, but who knows, right? Maybe it's going to be late February. I simply do not know. So I've obviously been very, very bullish DeFi kingdoms, and I continue to be bullish DeFi kingdoms. I think there's a lot of hope surrounding subnets, just because I think as a Jewel farmer, a holder, I see the limitations that Harmony provides, and there's a lot of hope for a Crystal Veil, right? So if subnets, if Ava Labs does not deliver, I can see it being a seldom use. But I'm betting on the execution for Ava Labs, right? I think they're good operators, and I think if DeFi Kingdoms does well, right? Imagine subnets launch, tons of liquidity come in, price goes up, everyone's gonna be like, oh my god, subnets gaming, it makes so much sense. Then I can kind of imagine a scenario, right? I'm kind of trying to predict the future psychology of market participants, where if DeFi Kingdoms as well, maybe people will also bid the other game on a subnet, which is going to be Crabada. So I kind of think of it as a reflexivity play. It's the short to midterm. I'm way more bullish Jewel than I am Crabada, right? Or the CRA token. I think the team is stronger, the community is stronger, etc. And my bet sizing reflects that, right? I have way more Jewel than I do CRA. However, I do think it's interesting, right? If you want to bet on gaming, maybe CRA is interesting for you. And I'll go over the risks later, right? I don't think of this as like it's an amazing play. It's a risk managed position in my portfolio, and I don't want you to FOMO in because there are a bunch of risks that I'll go over later in the video, but just sharing you how I think about the markets. So For those that don't know Crabada, I'll kind of go over it and think of this presentation as, if I watch this, I'll get like a 70% overview of the Crabada ecosystem. If you want to learn more about it, then you have to do the research yourself, right? I'm just here to provide an overview of the meta, how it works, and I guess like how do you want to get started, right? So it's a play-to-earn game on Avalanche. It's an Avalanche native game. You can buy these crab NFTs to earn yield via in-game currencies by participating in various mini games. Subnets coming this quarter. So let's kind of go over the tokens. There's a CRA token, right? Think of this as the AXS token. It's the governance token. There's also Crabada amulets. I don't really see a point for these amulets at this given point in time, but you can stake your CRA to earn amulets, and you can participate in lotteries and whatnot. And then there's TUS, treasure under the sea. And you can kind of think of this as the SLP token from Axie, right? So, if you play the game, you'll be earning TUS, and think of TUS as the in-game currency, right? Feel free to pause the video if you want to look into it. So, if you want to kind of simplify your decision making, CRA is AXS, TUS is SLP. And, I guess one of the problems with Axie Infinity is that whenever you want to buy an Axie, you have to buy it with ETH, right? So there really doesn't really create demand for SLP. And if you look at the price of SLP, it's kind of just dumping, right? And it's making Axie, like the play to earn aspect, less profitable. So, they kind of saw this as a problem, and the Crabada team said, hey, let's make TUS the in-game currency. So yes, TUS is going to be super inflationary, but you need to buy TUS to participate in the game itself. Currently, the only game is the idle game, meaning that you just click a button and you just like wait, right? It doesn't really, there's like not that much interaction. And there's two games. There's the mining, where you can send your crabs to mine, and then there's like the looting aspect too, where the looters can steal from the mining, right? And I'll kind of go over how that works. So the mining aspect takes roughly 4 hours, and the looting aspect takes roughly 2.5 hours, I believe. So this is kind of like the flow. So let's say you take your 30 crabs, you start mining, and then maybe if no looters attack your mine, then you just like win that game and you just like collect a bunch of TUS. But if the looters come, right, if the looters try to attack your mine, then you can reinforce your mine, right, by hiring crabs. And then so you can go to the tavern, and these are I took the screenshot a few days ago, but if the looters come, you can rent out some crabs to reinforce your mine, right? It's war, right? It's a battle. And then then the looters can reinforce, right? So it's kind of like this: mining begins, then looting happens, and then the miners reinforce with crabs, then the looters reinforce with crabs, and then once those two steps are taken, then the miners can also hire another crab, right? So at the end, it's gonna be like a 5v5 aspect, and whoever has more points is gonna win the game. And it's kind of dependent on the battle points, right? I'll share some screenshots actually. But if you mine successfully, right, whether you either successfully defend or your mine is not looted, you earn roughly 4 CRA and 300 TUS. And if you lose, right, if you get looted, you only get 1.3 CRA and 100 TUS. And obviously, if you loot, then you get the difference between the four. Right, you get the delta of 3.75, 1.3125, right here, and also 221. But if you loot and you lose, then you barely get anything, right? So that's it's kind of how it works. So this is a gameplay. It's nothing special, but you have some crabs here, right? Yeah, they're mining, right? They're mining the treasure under the sea, and then any looter, right? Any looting crabs can loot this mine in a 90-minute period, and then bam, they come, right? The looters are here. So now the miner, right, they have a chance to reinforce their mine for 30 minutes, and then it just happens 4 times, and then whoever has more battle points ends up winning, right? So the mining team has 673, looter has 679. So the miners, they have to reinforce their mine, crabs with high battle points, so they can defend this mine essentially. Okay, so let's kind of go over the meta, right? So the game itself is pretty simple, but how do you actually choose which crabs to buy, and like what is the competitive landscape of the Crabada ecosystem? So right now the meta is that, okay, well, first of all, like 45% of the crabs in circulation, right, in population, are bulk crabs. And these, you can kind of think of these as archetypes, right? So each crab has like an archetype, but the bulks are super powerful. They're like the best miners. So they're the crab population, right, I guess, is like infiltrated with a bunch of bulks. Obviously the Crabada team don't like this. They want some kind of even distribution. So bulks are going to get nerfed, right? It's going to be nerfed because they're overpowered, and it's going to be nerfed on the 15th. So hopefully the crab population can be more balanced. and they're going to introduce this factional advantage chart, right? So you can kind of think of this as like Pokemon, right? So like water has advantage over fire, fire has an advantage over grass, and the stuff like that, where, you know, like the bulk miners are in the ore faction, right? So if you just look at the arrows, you can see that Lux, right, and the Lux and the Fairy archetype, they're going to have an advantage over ores. So you can assume that the Lux and Fairy archetypes, or the factions, right, for whatever archetypes are in this faction, are just going to gain more value, right? So the Lux, I've talked to some Crabada players, and they mentioned that, hey, you know, like these prime crabs, right? So we have the bulks, right, and then we have the primes. People assume that the primes are going to be the next meta, right? Just because they have an advantage over bulks, and there's also a 10% mining reward if you have primes, right? So not only do you have the mining reward, you also get to, you know, have an advantage over 45% of the crab population. So people expect primes to, you know, I guess the prime population to go up, just because, you know, people want primes. You know, it is how it is. So after the nerf on the 15th, you know, people assume that primes, they're going to gain more value, and you can kind of see this in the tavern, right? You can kind of see this in the marketplace, where, you know, these are primes, right? These are I'll kind of go over like the virgin aspect, but, you know, these are virgin primes, meaning that, you know, they haven't had sex and they haven't had babies. Yeah, it kind of sounds ridiculous, but, you know, the floor of these virgin prime crabs are 70,000 TUS, $20,000. Pretty crazy. I took this screenshot a few days ago, so, you know, maybe the price is kind of different, but, you know, the barrier to entry is very high, and, you know, the prime crabs have a premium. And just because the bulks are overpopulated and people know that, you know, they're going to get nerfed, the virgin bulks have a 23,000 TUS floor, right? So, you know, we can kind of see like a 3x premium on the prime crabs at this point. So, you know, like I mentioned, the barrier to entry is pretty high, right? It's not that accessible. To be honest, like most play-to-earn games are really inaccessible. They're gonna have like scholarship programs. I mean, all these games are gonna have like their own version of scholarship programs, but you know, the barrier to entry is pretty high, so that might halt some user growth. But, you know, let's kind of dig deeper on how you can calculate an ROI for breeding crabs, right? Because not only do you buy crabs to mine loot with, you can also, you know, buy a bunch of crabs and like make them have babies, right? You know, you gotta love that. So 2 crabs can make up to 2 crab eggs, and it takes 5 days for these crab eggs to hatch, right? So this is kind of how the crab population goes up, right? The inflation aspect. So, you know, I guess the first baby you're gonna have, or like the first egg that you breed, is gonna be much cheaper than like the 4th and 5th egg, right? It's kind of like similar to DeFi Kingdoms and Heroes, where your first summon is cheap, your second summon is a little bit more expensive, and then it kind of goes up over time, right? So, you know, that's why virgin crabs are cheaper. Virgin crabs have a premium, because, you know, they have a higher ROI, right? Naturally. So this is gonna be kind of like the cost, right? So if you have a if you have 2 virgin crabs, you spend like roughly 8,500 to, you know, breed, right? And you to make an egg, and also like 105. So you can kind of assume that you can kind of think about like the barrier to entry, right? Not only do you have to spend a few, like, you know, I mean, if you want to buy primes, right, you have to spend like 20 grand on 3 crabs, right? And then if you want to breed them, you also have to spend 8,500 TUS and 100 CRA to, like, you know, make babies. So, you know, it's definitely not accessible, you know, if you know, trying to get into it, but, you know, it is what it is. But, you know, it does have an ROI, right? Because you can kind of assume that, okay, like I can make these babies, I can make my prime babies for 8,500 TUS, and then after it hatches in 5 days, I can sell it for like 70,000 TUS. So you can kind of see the ROI aspect, right? So, you know, it kind of makes sense to breed up to 4 times, because, you know, if you can sell your crabs for 70k TUS and it costs 51k to make a prime, then, you know, there's a positive ROI there, right? So there are various breeding strategies, right? You know, there are much better people that can explain this, but, you know, the TLDR is that, like, you know, there's like this ABC strategy that I'll kind of go over, and, you know, and that's because there's like no incest allowed, right? You can't have 2 crabs make a baby, and you can't have the parent and the baby make babies, because that's disgusting. Okay, so I'll go over the left side, right? The ABC breeding method. So, you know, you start with ABC, right? The 3 crabs. You have A and B make 2 eggs, right? And they hatch, right? Call them AV1, AV2, right? yeah, make those babies. But because there's no incest allowed, you have to have the third one to make more babies, right? So AV2 and C, make 2 babies, AV2C1, AV2C2, and then you can kind of stack AV1 and AV2C1, and then you can kind of see how this loop kind of happens. And as long as it's profitable to breed, as long as the ROI is there, it makes sense for profit-driven individuals to buy up a bunch of these crabs, spend a bunch of money, make a bunch of babies, and as your crab population grows, make them go to the mine, maybe some looting aspect, and then generate TUS as income. And I'm not gonna go over this ABCD aspect, but it's a way for you to generate more crabs. There's a great article, I'll link in the description, by Cross-Chain Capital about like, okay, if you have 100K, how would you spend it, right? It kind of goes over how he would do it, right, or he or she. This was written before the nerf, so it might change, but he said, I'm gonna focus on buying 6 pure crabs, pure bulk crabs, and then like have them breed, and then just generate a bunch of income. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, like feel free to pause this, but article will be in the description below. Okay, so obviously this depends on the price of TUS, right? And you can't really come up with like a great ROI equation, right? Because you can't assume that price of these things are going to be stable. But if you can kind of think of these play to earn games as like glorified yield farming, right, with a higher upfront cost. Because when you're yield farm, you're generally farming in order to hopefully make more money, right, to recoup like your investment. Play to earn games are kind of similar, right? You just like in this case, you spend like 100K up front, and then hopefully through games and breeding and whatever, you make more than 100K, right? But it's hopefully these things get cheaper over time. Play to earn games, it's definitely not made for the average consumer, but that's kind of how the system works. This is outdated, right? Miko, I suggest you follow Miko. Great Crabada max, not a maxi, but Crabada gamer, kind of goes over the ROI, right? So on the 25th of January, obviously it's outdated before the nerf. You can kind of assume that, okay, like at the time you can have like a 40 to 50 day ROI, and of course the meta changes, and it's kind of like yield farming with added layers of complexity. So people that are super into it, definitely there's a lot of alpha to be had, right? But it's definitely complicated. Scholarship program is coming soon. I don't know when, but it is what it is. So CRA, TUS, which one's a better investment? I simply do not know, but let's kind of go over my take. So TUS price action, it's gone up a lot. You can look up the charts, but that's because because the ROI of breeding was so popular, people were buying TUS to buy crabs, and people were buying TUS to get people to breed, or get the crabs to breed, right? But and you can kind of see this in the bulk. 45% of crab populations are bulks, so you can kind of see that like people were just like making a bunch of bulk babies, right, crab babies, because they were so profitable. But because the nerf is happening, people expect that the breeding activity is going to slow down, just because the rest of the crab population is low, right? Just because I think the prime population is roughly 11%, right? So a bunch of people are going to start breeding primes. But just because the number of primes are so low, the demand for TUS isn't going to be that high, right? If that makes sense. It's purely supply and demand. So I talked to a Crabada expert, and he said, I'd expect breeding activity to drop off until the nerf and fall around 20 cents. I wouldn't be worried because it's predictable, right? I mean, just use your brain. It makes sense, right? TUS, the buy pressure is probably not going to offset the supply, because the mining aspect, you earn like 300 TUS per game, right? It's pretty high inflation, but it is what it is. TUS I consider to be like the farm token, right? Since it's like the income token, right? And this is like what people are selling to make profit on the game and whatnot. And CRA seems to be a more passive way to gain exposure to the Crabada ecosystem. It is a governance token. Like, what the hell is the utility? But it didn't stop Axie from pumping that hard, right? So what is my verdict? What am I doing? So I'm betting on Subnets doing well. I'm making a big assumption, right? So it's kind of like this like layered process of, I think Subnets are going to be bullish for DeFi kingdoms. I think DeFi kingdoms are going to do well. I think Jewel and Crystal will do well. If Jewel and Crystal will do well, then I would expect CRA to also do well because of like the market psychology of just market participants. So I own some CRA, right? It's not that big, right? I own way more Jewel just because I'm way more bullish Jewel, but I kind of think of it as the echo play, the reflexivity play, etc. right? And I don't have like I'm not buying crab because I think it's the future of finance, right? High cost entry makes me not want to invest in these crabs, right? I mean, 100K in the crabs, like how can I justify that, right? It doesn't make any sense. But for me at least, right? Maybe it makes sense for most people, and maybe if you do the math, it actually makes sense. But I'm not really interested at this given point in time. But I'm monitoring the game every day, right? It seems to have a strong community, right? It's got some strong memes, right? The memes are super powerful, right? And I love memes. They do have a strong team, right? It is what it is. And players have a decent ROI. So as long as there's a decent ROI, you can expect in-game activity and velocity of crabs and TUS to be high. And there's roughly 1,500 daily active users, according to one of the experts. I can't fact check this, but I'm just it's what I heard. Cons: high barrier to entry, right? So sure, like even if it has a high ROI, it can bring in a lot of users, but at some point it's going to reach a plateau, right? If it's going to require 100K for people to try, then even a millionaire is not going to feel comfortable, right? Like buying 100K in crafts, and also because it takes a lot of time. Idle game isn't too engaging, right? You just you open up a mine and you reinforce. It could be time intensive, right? So I mean, PvP's aspect is coming soon. I don't know when, but it's coming. There's a video on the Crabada YouTube channel about this 3v3 PvP, and there's these crabs are pinching each other, they're shooting rockets and whatnot. And also it's hard to gauge ROI because it's most of your ROI is being paid out in TUS, and if TUS dumps, then ROI might go down. If TUS pumps, then it might be super profitable. I simply do not know, but definitely risks. So different strategies. I'm doing step one or idea one of just holding CRA, right? Not too big a position, right? Risk managed position, but it's interesting, right? You can stake CRA to earn Crabada amulets. There's a 21-day unbought period. I'm not a fan of locking up my CRA tokens, but if you want to force yourself to diamond hands for whatever reason, then maybe you can do that. You can LP CRA AVAX on Joe, right? And farm in volatility muted position. You can bite the bullet, buy crabs, and play the game, ROI, whatever. Or you can speculate on TUS or the TUS AVAX farm. Took this screenshot a few days ago, but AVAX paying that much, CRA AVAX, and AVAX TUS paying that much, right? It's probably going to go down, but yeah, it's something to monitor. There are a bunch of eyeballs on Crabada, right? For example, BreederDAO, it's backed by Andreessen Horowitz, Delphi, Hashed. They raised $10 million, and they mentioned that they're going to be focusing their breeding strategies on Crabada, Pegaxi, and Axie community, of course. For most of these games, if the ROI makes sense, you should expect money to come in, right? If markets are efficient, then these inefficiencies will be filled. It's hard to predict these things, right? Am I bullish the game? It's just wait and see, right? I mean, for most of these games, right, it's kind of like a glorified yield farming Ponzi, and you kind of have to take risk to bet on the future growth of the game. But I'm bullish. I'm just bullish Subnets, so I'm just making a small bet here. So let's kind of go over the risks. There are a lot of risks actually, and I have to cover them, right? As my channel gets bigger, I just have to go over risks because I just don't want people to just buy into coins, especially because we're not in the most bullish market, right? So is it reasonable to expect altcoins to pump? Maybe not, right? So one of the risks obviously is the subnets risk, right? So I'm going off the assumptions that subnets work, but what if they get delayed, or what if it's super buggy? I'm more than, I mean, my bias is that it's not, EVA Labs are going to execute, but it's an uncertainty, right? I'm kind of betting that it's going to work. And if there are delays, that's going to suck. If there are bugs, it's going to derail the Gamefi experience. We mentioned here, right? The early February comment, people are hey, where the hell, hey, we're lacking dopamine. Where's the dopamine? Kevin's hey, calm down, guys. If there's delays, blame Luigi, right? It seems like we always blame Luigi. Poor Luigi, right? He's just trying his best out here. We trust you, Luigi. We trust you. Barrier to entry. Obviously, like I mentioned, I already mentioned this, but user growth is probably not going to be that high because the barrier to entry is kind of ridiculous, right? But there are other ways, right? You can like buy 2 crabs, make babies, and then it's like play the game. You can buy a crab, rent it out in the tavern. I mean, there are different various ways to play it. But it's for these like less proven games. I mean, like they're lower market cap for a reason, right? Like if you wanted to bet on like a proven game, then you're probably going to be buying at like 50x price appreciation. So it's a whales game. It's going to price out your users. It might be stagnant growth, right? Unless the floor comes down, etc. Another risk, we're not in the most bullish environment, and if the markets are pricing in perfection, incremental buyers may already be exhausted, right? Because subnets, they're not like new news, right? We've known about subnets since like January, or I mean even December, right? I mean, people have known about subnets, and people have known that DeFi Kingdoms is coming on subnets, for quite some time now. So it's not like buying now it means that you're early, right? I don't know, right? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But if a bunch of people are buying because of subnets, then maybe no one's gonna buy when subnets actually come out, right? It could be sell the news. It's kind of like Andre's project, right? Everyone bought because VE33, but like people didn't really understand like what VE33 meant, and when it actually like I guess like came out, it's like all the buyers were exhausted. So that's always a risk. And it's like public information, right? You can't just like look at one thing and be like, oh, that's bullish, I'm gonna buy, because I always work under the assumption that markets are efficient and most things are being priced in. And if most things are priced in, then like what is the edge, right? So Kobe said it best, like like Avalanche, they've been talking about this for a while, right? Avalanche Rush 2.0, whatnot, right? So everyone already knows about the big program dropping in early February, colloquially named Rush 2.0. Focus on subnets because your team's communications leaking to 17 Telegram channels within moments of them existing, right? So what is the alpha? What is the edge? I simply do not know. That's why, it's a risk managed position. I'm betting way bigger on Jewel, right? I'm way more bullish Jewel than Crabada, but, small bet. Another risk, right? A seed investor unlock. It's 12 million CRA is going to be unlocked on the 15th, right? It's a good Valentine's Day gift, I guess. They got in at a penny, right? So I think it's like $1.80 or something right now. It's like 180x, right? So surely, these people are going to take humble profits. You can kind of see the schedule here, right? Every 3 months it gets unlocked. But from a game theory perspective, I wouldn't expect the 15th to cause a big sell-off. Because if I was a seed investor, right? If I was a seed investor, like, will I sell like, when it gets unlocked? Probably not. Like, I'd rather much sell when there's hype, right? Like, let's say late February, it gets like, there's some few announcements like Avalanche Rush 2.0, subnets, oh, it's coming, right? And everyone's like, oh, it's so bullish, right? And it pumps, right? And then if I was a seed investor, I would much rather wait to sell into those guys, right? Like, yeah, like, thank you for the exit liquidity. So I wouldn't think of February 15th as an important date. I would think of late February, early March to be more of a risk, if that makes sense. Can the market absorb this much selling pressure? And I also don't know the psychology of these seed investors, right? Like maybe, maybe they're so bullish that they're not going to sell, right? But if you got in at a penny, then like I would take humble profits, right? Like how can you know? How can you know? Like, but it is what it is. Like I can't be angry at these seed investors, right? Because without these seed investors, Crabada probably wouldn't have existed in the first place. It's kind of the game you play. But it's a lot of selling pressure. I think this is going to be like a roughly 8 to 12% increase in the circulating supply of Crabada. So it is what it is. You should know, right? These seed investors, they want their exit liquid. They want their profits, right? Lastly, I kind of go over some good follows, right? So Crab Radio, I think it's super cool, right? Because one of the reasons I got into DeFi Kingdoms was because they have a super strong community, and we had these like Jewel Cast, Jewel Radio, like whatever, pop up, and they weren't even paid, right? They're just like doing this out of their own like love for the game. Crab Radio, similar, they have weekly podcasts. They're not being paid Crabada, right? They just love crabs, right? They just love the crab memes, and they have these like Twitter Space events. Miko, obviously, this person's like a gaming expert on the Avalanche ecosystem. He's playing various games. I follow them. And then Crabstar, right? We gotta give a shout out for Crabstar. I mean, Crabstar made the good memes, right? Snib snib, right? Snib snib. I think the snib snib meme is gonna circulate a lot more on Twitter, right? This for real. How my family's Valentine ends and my son gets absolutely no hose. This son's playing Crabada. Snib 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 snib, right? Strong memes, and the crab memes are pretty funny actually. So if you just like look up, I guess $CRA on Twitter, you're probably gonna see a bunch of snib snib memes, right? So strong memes, but there's the thesis, there's the idea, bunch of risks, right? Sell the news, maybe macro, maybe, but I think GameFi is hot, and I feel like I'd be foolish to not allocate some of my portfolio into gaming. So obviously DeFi Kingdoms was one, Cra is one, and I have some other gaming plays I'm looking at. But in terms of short-term catalysts, there seems to be, Avalanche Rush 2.0 coming, right? So incentivized subnets that could bring on more users. But it's kind of how you have to think about the markets. My entire investment thesis for crypto has been like, hey, incentive programs are bullish. So if Ava Labs can execute, right, I think it'll be good. I gave Ava Labs the hard time for Avalanche Rush 1.0 because they kept delaying it. But in hindsight, given where the ecosystem is at, like where it's at now, it's a really good ecosystem, right? I think, Luigi, Kevin, like Emin, like I think Ava Labs executed pretty well for like growing out the Avalanche ecosystem. And, most of my funds are on Avalanche because, it's a really nice place to be in. It doesn't go down, it functions. And, I'm looking forward to subnets, like mostly for DeFi Kingdoms, but, maybe Crabada, maybe they can have some growth too. Only time will tell. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys liked the video. Please do not ape. There are a bunch of risks, right? Always look at the risks. And like I mentioned, manage your risk, right? So Crabada, very speculative. If you already have Jewel, like, I think sizing Crabada smaller would make more sense, right? Because, you should bet bigger on safer things. And yeah, so not financial advice. Lastly, if you're going to be at ETHDenver, I'll be there, right? I'll be hosting an event with Justin Bram. I'll link this in the description below. Justin and I will be opening up a tab, right? And we'll cover beer, seltzer, cocktails, right? So don't no shots, right? I'm not trying to get blackout drunk. So I'll be in Denver. I'll probably not be posting as much next week just because I'm traveling and whatnot. I'll still make videos for the Discord, but yeah. So thank you guys for watching, and let's see how the crabs are gonna do.